The morning they took me out of my own house, I was wearing my gardening clothes. I remember that detail because it seemed so absurd. I had been on my knees in the front yard, pulling up the dead marigolds along the fence, when the black SUV pulled into the driveway. My son stepped out first. Then a woman I didn't recognize, carrying a briefcase. Then two men in pale blue scrubs who stood by the vehicle like they were waiting for a signal. I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees. My son didn't hug me. He didn't even meet my eyes. "Dad," he said, "this is Dr. Paulson and her associates. We've been worried about you." I looked at the woman with the briefcase. She gave me a practiced smile, the kind you give someone you've already decided something about. I was 67 years old that morning. I had spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I had designed drainage systems for 4 counties in this state. I owned my house outright, had no debt, and had just that previous Tuesday driven myself to my own doctor's appointment and been told my blood work was excellent. I did the crossword every morning. I called my sister in Tucson every Sunday. I was not confused. But I want you to understand something about that day, because this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They assume I didn't see it coming. They assume I was some helpless old man who got blindsided by his own family. I had seen it coming for 11 months. That's the part of the story I want to tell you. My son's name is Marcus. He is 41 years old and has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness. And for most of his life, I was proud of him. He married Nicole 8 years ago, and for the first few years, I genuinely liked her. She was sharp, ambitious, organized, the kind of woman who sends thank you notes and remembers birthdays. I thought she was good for him. I started noticing the change about 2 years before that morning in the garden. It was small things at first. Marcus stopped calling on Sundays. When I invited them to dinner, Nicole always had a reason they couldn't come. When they did visit, she would walk through my house in a particular way, not looking at me when I spoke, but looking at the walls, the furniture, the framed photographs, the built-in bookshelves I'd put in myself, like she was taking inventory. Once, I came into the kitchen and found her in my study. She was standing at my desk, not touching anything, just standing there. I asked her what she was looking for. She said she was just admiring the room. I went upstairs afterward and sat on the edge of my bed for a while. I have a property in Western Virginia, 42 acres, a farmhouse that needs work, a pond, and a stretch of old-growth timber that 3 separate developers had tried to buy from me over the years. My wife fell in love with that land when we first saw it in 1989. We used to take Marcus there every summer when he was small. He learned to fish in that pond. After his mother passed, I kept it partly because I couldn't let it go, and partly because I'd always imagined it going to him someday. I found out from a friend what it was worth now. I won't give you the exact number, but it was enough to make a person do something foolish. Around that time, Marcus started bringing up what he called my episodes. A moment at Thanksgiving where I'd apparently repeated a story I had already told. A time I'd left the back door unlocked overnight. A Sunday phone call where I'd gotten confused, he said, about what year something had happened. None of these things struck me as unusual for a man in his late 60s, but Marcus framed them with such careful concern that I almost started to believe him. That's the insidious thing about it. When your own child looks at you with that particular expression, worry mixed with pity mixed with something else you can't quite name, you start second-guessing yourself. But I am an engineer. I deal in systems, in cause and effect, in load-bearing facts. So I started paying attention to what was actually happening, rather than to how it was being described to me. I called my attorney. Not a family friend. A real estate and estate attorney named Carl, who I had worked with for 20 years and who I trusted completely. I told him what I was observing. I told him about the land. I told him about Nicole's inventory walks. I told him about Marcus's sudden documentation of my supposed episodes. Carl listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Raymond, I want you to come into the office tomorrow." What happened in that office over the next 3 months is the reason that by the time that SUV pulled into my driveway, I had already moved almost everything. I should tell you about Carl, because he's important. We met in 1998 when I needed help with the Virginia property deed. He is 72 now, retired from his firm but still consulting, And he has the particular sharpness of men who have spent 40 years watching people try to cheat each other in legal language. He has seen every version of this story. Adult children manufacturing incompetency claims to gain guardianship. Quiet transfers of assets before the court even rules. Doctors paid for reports that said what someone needed them to say. He was not surprised by what I told him. The mechanism, he explained, is guardianship by a family member. If Marcus and Nicole can convince a court that you lack capacity to manage your own affairs, they can petition to become your legal guardians. Once that's granted, they control your finances, your property decisions, everything. I asked him how hard that was to do. He said it was easier than most people thought, especially if the person asking for it was a close family member, especially if they had documentation, even thin documentation of cognitive concerns, and especially if the target didn't fight it. The key word, he said, is fight. He looked at me across his desk. Are you willing to fight? I told him I'd been fighting harder things than this since before his firm existed. He almost smiled. We spent the next 3 months doing 3 things. First, I underwent a full neuropsychological evaluation not through Marcus's recommended doctor, but through a specialist at the University of Maryland. Completely independent, documented, signed, and notarized. The report concluded that I had no cognitive impairment of any kind. Second, Carl helped me restructure my estate. The Virginia property went into a properly constructed, irrevocable trust. The beneficiary was a land conservation organization, with a life estate reserved for me, meaning I had full use and control of the land for my lifetime, but it could never be transferred by a guardian or a court without triggering a legal challenge that would take years and cost a fortune. What Marcus thought he was getting his hands on had effectively become untouchable. Third, and this is the part I didn't tell anyone, Carl and I documented everything. Every visit from Nicole. Every conversation where Marcus raised my supposed episodes. A log of dates and descriptions. Cross-referenced with my calendar, my medical appointments, my phone records. 31 years as an engineer taught me that paper protects you. Paper is the thing that exists after the argument is over. I was done by November. And then I waited. They moved faster than I expected. In January, Marcus called me and said he and Nicole wanted to come over to talk about some plans for the future. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon with Nicole's cousin, who turned out to be a junior associate at a law firm I had never heard of. The cousin, a young woman named Paige, who could not look at me directly, laid a folder on my kitchen table and explained that Marcus and Nicole were concerned about my long-term care. They had found a wonderful facility in northern Maryland, she said. Very comfortable. A lot of amenities. They thought it would give me peace of mind. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I asked Paige if what she was describing was a memory care facility. She said it offered a range of services. I asked Marcus to look at me. He did. Finally. His face was doing something complicated. I don't know if it was guilt or if it was the particular expression people make when they've told themselves a story long enough that they believe it. I told them I wasn't interested, thanked Paige for coming, and asked them to leave. 3 weeks later, Marcus filed a petition for guardianship in county court. I called Carl that same evening, and he said, "Good. Now we respond. Here is what I want you to understand about the next 4 months, because I think it is the part that matters most. My son hired a psychiatrist who had evaluated me exactly once, for 45 minutes, in a session Marcus had arranged and driven me to under the pretense that it was a routine wellness check for my primary care physician. The psychiatrist's report described what it called notable confusion regarding recent events and some difficulty with sequential recall. It recommended further evaluation and suggested that independent living might not be appropriate. 45 minutes. I had been a licensed professional engineer for 3 decades. I had managed budgets in the tens of millions. I still balanced my own checkbook by hand every month because I preferred it. Carl filed our response with the full neuropsychological report from the University of Maryland. 6 hours of standardized testing, administered by a specialist with 30 years of experience, yielding a 58-page document that concluded in clinical language that was difficult to misread, that I had no deficits in memory, executive function, or decision-making capacity. We also filed the log. Every recorded instance of Marcus raising concerns about my cognition, with dates, contexts, and cross-referenced documentation showing no corresponding medical event. The judge asked Marcus's attorney if they wished to request an independent evaluation. They said no. That should tell you something. The petition was denied. I was sitting in the courtroom when the judge read the ruling. Marcus was 3 rows ahead of me. Nicole was next to him. She had a very particular stillness to her that I recognized it was the stillness of someone calculating their next move. Marcus didn't turn around when it was over. He walked out with Nicole and Paige, and they were gone before I had stood up from my seat. Carl put his hand on my shoulder. "That's round 1, he said quietly. I asked him what round 2 was. He said, "Whatever they do next." What they did next took me longer to understand, and it is the part of this story that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I have a savings account that my wife and I built together over 40 years, not spectacular by some measures, but significant, and put together dollar by dollar through the kind of careful living that people used to do before they decided patience was a character flaw. A few years after my wife passed, I had added Marcus as a joint account holder. Not because I needed to, not because I was confused, because he was my son, and I trusted him, and I thought it was a sensible thing to do for estate purposes. He had been making withdrawals for 14 months, not dramatic ones, not the kind that would immediately trigger a bank notice, careful ones, calculated ones, 2,000 here, 3,000 there, sometimes 5, always below the reporting thresholds, always spaced out, always on days when he knew I was unlikely to be checking the account. I found out because Carl had advised me early on to review every account statement going back 2 years. I am embarrassed to admit I had not been doing that. I trusted the automatic deposits, the automatic payments, the general sense that the numbers were where they were supposed to be. I hadn't looked carefully. When I did look carefully, the number was just over $63,000. I sat with that number for several days. I want to be honest with you about what those days felt like, because I think there is a version of this story where I am calm and decisive and unaffected, and that would not be true. I sat in my kitchen in the evenings and I thought about all the years. I thought about teaching him to drive in the parking lot of the county fairgrounds. I thought about the summer he was 16 and we drove together to the Virginia property and fished for 3 days and barely said anything, and it was enough. I thought about his mother's face at his wedding, and then I thought about Nicole standing in my study, taking inventory, and I made a decision. I reported it. The civil fraud complaint went through Carl's office. The bank cooperated fully. They had their own concerns by that point, and once they pulled the full transaction history, the picture was considerably cleaner than even I had realized. $63,412 over 14 months. Documented, dated, irrefutable. We filed in March. What I did not know at the time, what I only learned later through the proceedings, was that the guardianship petition had not been Marcus's idea originally. It had been Nicole's. She had found a financial advisor, a man named Brett, who turned out to have his own set of legal problems, and together they had developed what I can only describe as a plan. The Virginia property would be sold. The proceeds would go into an account that Nicole's cousin Paige had helped structure. Marcus would have signing authority. I would be in a memory care facility an hour north, visiting schedule permitting. Brett, it turned out, had done this before, with other families, with other elderly parents. When the financial fraud investigation expanded to include him, things moved quickly. Marcus hired a criminal defense attorney in April. Nicole's cousin Paige stopped returning calls. I heard from my sister in Tucson that Marcus had tried to reach her in late April, asking if she would speak to me on his behalf. She told him she had already spoken to me. She told him she understood the situation clearly. She told him not to call again. The civil case settled in July. I will not go into every detail because some of it is still legally sensitive, but I will tell you that $63,412 is not a number that simply disappears from a fraud proceeding. Marcus's defense centered on the claim that the withdrawals were for my benefit, that he had been paying for things I needed. Carl asked him to produce receipts. He produced 11 months of documentation for approximately $8,000 in expenses. The remaining $55,000 had no receipts. The settlement required full restitution. It required Marcus to be removed from all joint accounts. It required, under the civil agreement, A period of no contact at my election. I elected no contact. Nicole filed for divorce in August. I learned this from the same county records that everyone else could access. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I read it. I felt something, but it was not what I expected. It was not satisfaction. It was a quiet, flat kind of grief. The grief of having been right about something you very much wished you had been wrong about. Brett was charged separately. That case is still ongoing as I record this. I am 68 years old now. I live in my house, which I have no intention of leaving until I decide to leave it. The marigolds along the front fence came back this spring better than they ever have. I don't know if that is gardening or stubbornness or just good soil, but I will take it. I want to say something to any of you listening who are in the earlier stages of what I went through. Maybe you have a child who has started talking about your decline in a way that doesn't match your experience of yourself. Maybe someone has suggested a facility or a doctor you didn't choose or a financial arrangement you didn't request. Maybe you have noticed someone walking through your house like they are measuring it. I want you to listen to that instinct. I am not saying your family doesn't love you. I am not saying everyone who expresses concern is after something. But I am saying this. The fact that someone is your child does not make you immune to harm from them. And the fact that you are older does not mean your judgment is the problem. Get an independent evaluation, not from their doctor, yours. Find an attorney who is yours alone, not a family attorney, not someone recommended by the person you're concerned about, someone who works only for you. Document everything. Write it down, date it, keep it somewhere they cannot access. And do not wait until the SUV is in the driveway. I waited longer than I should have. I got lucky that I still had enough time. Some people don't. Marcus reached out in October. A letter, handwritten, which surprised me. I won't read it to you in full, but I will tell you that it contained the word sorry 4 times and the phrase I let her convince me twice. I sat with that letter for a long time. I have not responded yet. I don't know if I will. There are people who will tell you that forgiveness is for your own peace, not for the other person, and I believe that is probably true. There are also people who will tell you that some things take time, and that time itself is not a failure, and I believe that is true also. What I know is this. I am still here. My land is still mine. My accounts are intact. My mind is clear. The marigolds are doing fine. And whatever I decide about my son, whatever version of the future I choose to walk toward it, will be my decision. Made clearly, made freely, made on my own terms. That is the only ending I was ever interested in.